Welcome, everybody. You are listening to the Startup Secrets for Entrepreneurs, and I am your host, Shelby Olischlager. Our mission here is to help entrepreneurs make a difference and navigate the messy world of startup or a relaunch. Join me today where we dig deep with our guests to give you the best concepts and strategies to fast track your business. Today, our special guest is Kurt David. So Kurt, thank you so much for joining. And to get started, can you please tell us a bit about what you do?
Wow. Well, thank you, Shelby. It's a pleasure to be on your show here. I got to tell you right off the bat, before I talk about what I do, I have to talk about who I am, right? I can't talk about what I do without talking about who I am. I always start with my foundation, which is I was raised, there was 8 of us in one house with one bathroom. So I learned early on in life that life was not about me, right? You learn early when there's 8 people in one house with one bathroom. But seriously, though, all 6 of us kids were on athletic scholarship and 2 of us played professionally. So imagine that household growing up. It was extremely competitive, brushing our teeth, whatever. And so that was the house I grew up in, and that was my foundation of who I was to become. Move forward, I was one of the 2 children that played professionally. My brother played basketball, and I played basketball. And so it was a great journey, paid vacation, as I called it. But as I also say, 100% of professional athletes ultimately lose their job, right? It's an undeniable fact. At some point, even pro athletes are done. And so when I was done playing pro basketball, I was a little lost, right? I mean, I lost a little bit of my identity, my purpose, wasn't sure what I was going to do, and it was suddenly taken away, right? And so fortunately, I had a degree at that time. I went to college and had my degree, and so I was able to fall back on that and then work on a master's degree in counseling. I did that for a while, became a counselor, and did that for a long time. And then I had an idea. That idea was to sit down with other former pro athletes and hear their journey about life after pro sports, and more importantly, Shelby, how they recreated their success. So I interviewed 20 former professional NBA, NFL, Major League Baseball, and hockey players and heard their story about how they recreated their success after pro sports. Well, what I discovered from that was that there was a commonality of success. In other words, I could see a pattern, right? One of the things as a counselor you look for is a pattern. So I saw a pattern of commonality of what they were doing in order to have success again after being a World Series champion, a Super Bowl champion, an MVP of the NFL, whatever their title was. And so I started working with former pro athletes and saying, hey, listen, here's a secret formula for after pro sports. And then I started getting into television production. And my agent and I at the time said, hey, your book was a big hit. Let's make a TV show out of it. So we created a TV show from Glory Days in which I interview former professional athletes about life after pro sports and, more importantly, how they recreated their success. We've done 4 seasons of the show. We won an Emmy Award with my interview for Rocky Bleier out of Pittsburgh, who played for the Steelers and won 4 Super Bowl championships. And then it spun into speaking with corporations and companies about change and how to handle change. And so it's been an interesting journey. As I joke with people, it's been like a 15-year overnight success, right? I mean, it's just, the being in the right place at the right time and making the right connections. And to the point now where the only 2 things I do is I produce TV shows and I do keynote speaking, and which is a great life. I mean, I really enjoy it. I'm able to pick and choose and, have time with my family, which is really important to me. And then also do what I love to do.
That's awesome. I'm really curious just to go back to the beginning when you started wanting to interview these people, like what inspired you to want to put yourself out there and learn from these other athletes?
Yeah, it was the book. I mean, the book was a hit, and From Glory Days was the title of the book as well. And having interviewed the athletes, I did about 60 book signings within the first few months. I mean, I was really hustling out, pushing the book and doing book signings. And we saw how popular it was. And so my agent and I at the time were like, boy, let's do something else with this. Let's do a radio show. Let's do a TV show. And I didn't have any TV background, right? I have an elementary education and a master's in counseling, right? That's my background educationally. And so for me, it was about learning. So I connected with a local producer who knew much more about TV production than I did. And it's just kind of scaled. I built a great team of people around me to the point now where I own a production company called Glory Days Productions. And we produce more than just my show. We produce other shows as well. But that said, it was all about learning. And to me, Shelby, I think the most important thing is building a team of people around you that are much smarter in areas that I don't know, right? I think that's the key. And I think, I've heard it from many other great leaders that you want to hire people that are smarter than you are in other areas. And it's true. It's very true.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I do hear that quite a lot. And it makes so much sense of how they're able to really change your direction. Like, did you really have an idea that this is where it was going to go from the beginning?
Uh, it's funny because, my faith is very strong. And so I believe that God opens the doors he wants me to walk through. And so I try to listen to say, okay, what door, I'm tired of banging my shoulder against doors, right? What door should I walk through? I watch and see what relationships open up, which opportunities open up. And not that it's all just fluid where I don't have any goals or ideas. I have very specific goals, but I also listen to say, what is the path right now? And so, if you would have told me 20 years ago, let's go back further than that, because I started writing a book about 20 years ago. If you would have told me 25 years ago that I was going to write a best-selling book, I would have laughed at you like, yeah, you're right. You're crazy. I don't like writing, right? I hate writing, as a matter of fact. If you would have saw me in elementary school, it would be like, I hate this writing. But thank God I had teachers that taught me, and I learned and listened, because that skill came in when I wrote my own book, right? When I wrote the book From Glory Days. And so if you were to go back 25 years, I'd say absolutely not, but it was an inspired idea, middle of the night. Literally, it was like at 3 a.m. I woke up, had the idea for the book. And then from that book turned into the TV show. The TV show turned into a production company, and then it turned into speaking. And so it's been an interesting journey. And no, a long answer to your short question. If you would ask me 25 years ago, I wouldn't have envisioned this at all.
Wow. I love that. You're kind of like living the exact path that I really want to go down. So I find this really cool. Talk to me a little bit about this, the TV shows and just your interviews. And you said about this commonality that you've noticed from these people. What is that? Like, what is that commonality to success that you found?
Yeah, what I discovered from working with former pro athletes initially was that there was a commonality of success during sudden change, and I actually found that it applies to corporations as well now. And so there's 5 things, and being the simple mind that I am, I created an acronym, right? And that acronym is RULES. Each letter stands for something. Each letter means something. And so when I work with athletes, or now more corporations, we talk about those 5 rules, as I call them, of success when dealing with change and transition. And the first one is refocus. I don't know if you want me to go into them. I mean, this could be a 3-hour workshop, literally, that I could do with this. And so to give you the crib note version, the R stands for refocus. What I've discovered is any individual, any corporation going through a change had to refocus. And the best way to refocus is evaluate current goals, establish new goals in clarity. And we could spend a whole day just talking about goal development and how do you develop goals in short term and long term. And but what I've discovered by somebody refocusing, it recreates a new passion and purpose. In other words, let's use a pro athlete as an example. All of a sudden, you have been a pro athlete for majority of your life, since 10 years old. And now let's say you're 25 or 30 years old and it's over. And all of a sudden you have to recreate and refocus on what is it who am I? What am I doing? And we're very passionate people. And so reestablishing that passion by having that refocus. Another great example is, I don't drink at all, but there was a thing called prohibition, right, back in 1920 that happened in America. And at that time, 1,243 breweries were existing in America that were suddenly told, hey, you can't do this anymore. I mean, think about that for a second. 1,243 breweries in America, when Prohibition hit, suddenly could no longer do that. And so the research I did on that was that over the course of Prohibition, 244 of those breweries survived. And so my thought was, well, we know what happened to the 80% that did not survive. What happened to the 20%? What did those 244 do? Well, one of them decided not to take Prohibition lying down, and they literally refocused. Instead of making beer, they started making malt extract, ginger ale, even car and auto parts. And so as a result, they're able to survive that sudden change. And as a result, Anheuser-Busch survived and became one of the biggest breweries in the world, right? I think they sold for 15 billion or whatever it was, or got an ungodly amount of money some years ago. But my point is, every corporation, every individual that goes through a change has a refocus. That's what the first step towards getting through change. The next letter, U, stands for using network. In other words, all of us have a network of people around us, and it's tapping into that network to say, who in my network can help me with this refocus? I know what my new goal is. I know what my new objective is as a corporation, as an individual. Who can help me with this? And one of the things I have to qualify when talking about using your network is I'm not talking about using and abusing people. I'm not talking about going to Shelby and saying, well, this is what I want to accomplish, and I'm going to use Shelby to get what I want. I'm talking about creating a win-win relationship. In other words, hey, Shelby, this is my new goal. This is my new refocus. I think you can help me with this. Let's create a win-win. Well, how can I help you? Right.
Mm-hmm.
And so looking for that win-win in that. And again, this could be a 3-hour workshop that I do, so I'm not going to go very deep into it. But that's the RU so far. And then the L stands for letting go. Bar none, no question, undeniably the most difficult for professional athletes. Why is that? Because it's in the marrow of our bones to never give up. Fall down 7, give it up 8, right? And so it's a default that we have as a pro athlete to never give up. And so part of the problem is there is a time to give up. There is a time to let go, and having the wisdom of when to do that. And it's the same thing for a company, right? There's a time to let go. And everybody's different with their timetable. I'll give you a great example. I got a phone call from a gentleman. He was a former Olympic athlete, and he called me up and says, hey, I just finished the Olympics. I won a bronze medal in my event. And I said, okay, you have my attention. He was calling from Houston, Texas. I said, you have my attention. He says, I'm not sure, I've heard you're the transition guy, but I'm not sure what to do. And so we started working through this rules. We got through this refocus, started looking at, okay, well, what would this refocus look like? Who's in your network you can tap into? Mm-hmm. We got to the letting go, and he just couldn't do it. He just couldn't let it go. He's like, I don't know if I want to commit another 4 years of my life or not to the Olympics. Took 6 months of conversation before he finally decided, yep, I'm going to let go. I'm going to move forward. Wow. The contrast, I had a former Major League Baseball pitcher. His agent contacted me and said, hey, Kurt, can you come to my office and sit down with him? He just got released in spring training. Sat down with him, started working through this rules concept. And within a week, he was done. He let go. He moved on. He's no longer pro. His whole mentality changed. So everybody's different, right? Everybody's different. And even with corporations, there's certain things we have to let go of, where there's certain successes that we have to let go of. There's certain failures we have to let go of. There's certain mentalities. You're a great example of that, Shelby. You shared a little bit off camera about your story. And I think that's one of the greatest assets that you're going to be able to share with people, is that you had the skills, but you had to let go of some things in order to move forward, right?
Absolutely.
And so letting go is a very important aspect of moving through change and transition, and identifying what that letting go is very important. I'm a history buff, right? I like sports. I also like history. And if you look at the Roman Empire, right, one of the greatest empires in history, when the generals would come home from their conquering lands, right, the generals would go off to Alexandria or whatever and conquer some country, and they'd come home and they'd had these big parades. They're kind of like a Super Bowl parade today, right, when we have these Super Bowl parades. So these Roman generals would come home back to Rome, and they'd have these big parades. They were called campaigns. You can look it up in history. Anyway, these Roman generals would be going through these parades, and as they're going through these parades, they had somebody on their chariot chirping in their ear the whole time, saying, all glory is fleeting. All glory is fleeting. In other words, great, you just conquered this land, you're back getting all these accolades. Now what, right? You got to let go and move on. And so that's an important aspect of going through change, is making sure we let go of what we need to let go of in order to move on. So that's the RUL. The E stands for execute. This is where the work comes in, right? All transition, all change takes work. It just doesn't happen. It's not just a one and done. I come up with my refocus. I use my network. I let go. This is where the grind comes in, because sometimes I have to do it over and over again. Sometimes I have to refocus and refine that, tap into my network more. I have to let go of something else I've identified. And I can go much more deeper into that. But a great story about that is somebody who I know that was an All-American basketball player out of Washington, D.C., best high school basketball player in the nation. He then went on to become an All-American basketball player at Syracuse University, best basketball player in the nation, considered one of the best basketball players in the nation. He then went on to become a #1 draft pick by the Detroit Pistons in the NBA. He then went on to become an NBA Hall of Famer, right, considered one of the best NBA players in history. He then went on to build a $500 million a year business. And he then went on to become mayor of Detroit, the city of Detroit. And so Dave Bing, anywhere along the line, could have easily rested on his laurels. Hey, I was a high school All-American. I was an NBA Hall of Famer. But he continued to recreate his success over and over again by working through this process, this refocus, this using his network, this letting go. And now to this day, he's doing inner city mentoring of kids in inner city Detroit. And so he's continuing to refocus and use his network and let go and execute this change over and over again. So there's an example. The final letter, S, stands for someone. What I've discovered is that anybody going through a change had a mentor, so to speak, that specifically helped them with what their identifying goal was. In other words, if I had to refocus and it was to become a TV broadcaster, I might have someone that is a mentor in that area, right? Ford Motor Company, as an example, I spoke to an executive many years ago. And when the economy turned down in 2008, there was a major turn down. Chrysler, Ford, GM, they were all in trouble, right? Major trouble. In fact, the government had to bail out GM and had to bail out Chrysler with loans and help them out. Ford did not take any government money. And I asked this executive, I said, well, what did you do? And he gave me a whole list of things that they did to help with that transition and that sudden change. But one of the things he said was that we tapped into a mentor, and it kind of perked my interest. I'm like, well, tell me more. He said Ford Motor Company had somebody that used to work for Ford Motor Company. Then he went off and ran Chrysler back in the 1980s when they were going through a lot of challenges and got them through those challenges. And so we tapped into Lee Iacocca to help us through this challenge back in 2008 as a mentor to say, hey, what did you do back then? How did you help us? Can you help us? And so, all of us need a mentor, one person in particular that can help us get to where we want to be through that change. And so RULES, each letter stands for something. Rules stands for refocus, use your network, let go, execute, which is the work and grit part, and then someone or mentor, in other words, to get through this change.
Wow. I hope people listening have a notepad and wrote this down because that's so good.
If not, you might have to re-listen to this again. But yeah, this, again, this could be a 30-minute keynote. It could be a 3-hour workshop that I do to really delve deep into this.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. And I like that, you found what works and it just really applies to anybody. Like, I think it would relate to anyone in any sort of backstory. They could take this and be like, yeah, it is applicable for their own situation. So I really like that. So as far as your business and stuff, now that you've been growing this, like, what are your goals moving forward? Like, what's your next year look like? Or what are some of your goals that you have for making this message bigger?
Yeah. And I don't want to timestamp this episode, but in 2019, I did 140 in-person speaking presentations. Mm-hmm. In 2020, I did 7. And in 2021, I did 3 in person. So that's been painful, needless to say. I mean, everything's shut down and we're just starting to see those in person come back. The great news is that from a business model, I've actually done less presentations, but for more money. And so that's been a nice transition that I'm doing less presentations, but the price point's a little bit higher. And so the goal is to, my goal is to do no more than 10 or 20. There's no way I want to do 100 plus presentations a year again. I don't want to do that, right? I want to help people, but I want to find more efficient ways to do that. And so doing 10 or 20 in-person presentations, continuing to producing TV shows. I got a couple other shows that I'm producing right now. I mentioned about From Glory Days, which is former professional athletes. I'm also executive producer of a mental health show, a show about mental health that airs weekly throughout Michigan as well as throughout all of America, and even in the Bahamas. It's airing right now. And so continuing to create great content for people to view. And for me, it's all about inspiring others through the stories of highly successful people that live a life of significance, right? Whether it be in the mental health field, professional athlete field, whatever that is. And you can relate as, somebody from your background that there's high caliber people, but they don't live a life of significance, right? And so helping others be inspired by those that are living a life of significance, that are making a change, that are doing things that, overcome, right? Those are the great stories that you want to hear about.
Mm-hmm. And just living that life of example, I think, is really key as well. If you can,
it's a place to start. Yeah. A wise person once told me, if you're going to start a revolution or start something that's life changing, you start by drawing a circle around yourself and start within that circle. Then you work out.
Yeah, I like that. Awesome. So for people listening that want to follow you and learn more, where can they find you?
Yeah, the easiest thing is my website, www.kurtdavid.com. So if you go to Kurt David, K-U-R-T, David, D-A-V-I-D.com, that's the easiest thing. You'll have access to what I do as a speaker, the TV shows. I also own a company. I'm part owner of a company called PurposePoint, which is an organizational development company. We do a purpose summit. We just had it down at the University of Notre Dame. We're going to be back there again next year. And our goal with that is to help leaders become better leaders, and especially to find purpose within what they do, but also within their companies to help their workforce identify their purpose as well.
Yeah, perfect. Well, I hope people listening will definitely tune into that and learn more, because I think that would be so beneficial for so many people. Just to wrap this up, I always like to ask if you have one final piece of advice or one thing that you want to leave us listeners thinking about.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is that all of us have been created for a purpose, right?
Mm.
We all have a purpose, and those purposes might change throughout life. In other words, it might tweak. My purpose was to play basketball, and then that was over. Then my purpose was to help others through counseling, and that changed. And now I help others through television production and speaking. And so, I think identifying our purpose, and for me, just to be very frank, it's to serve God and serve others. That's my purpose, and it has to fit within that lane. And if not, I don't want anything to do with it. And so, using my specific gifts and abilities. So, it apply to anybody out there. I guess it's finding your specific gifts and abilities, and then aligning that with your purpose. Because when you do, I got to tell you, life is very fulfilling as a result. Whether you make a billion dollars or make a dollar, life becomes more fulfilling. And the last thing I would leave is a question, right, for you and for all the people listening today. What makes your heart sing? What makes it sing? Because that's the question you want to answer. And if you can monetize that, boy, stand back. It's going to be a great journey for you.
Perfect. I love that. It's so true. I think the alignment and everything and really doing what you feel you're called to do makes it the journey that much sweeter. So I really appreciate everything that you said today. I definitely learned a lot. And yeah, thank you so much for joining us today.
Absolutely my pleasure, Shelby.
Okay.